It's showtime. Talking about a real position tonight, some offensive linemen. I've got Jake Morley. I will have Owen Riese shortly. I'm Jake Westendorf. This is the Gold Zone. Let's hit it. What's up, everybody? It's Wednesday night again. That means it's time for your favorite show. This is the Gold Zone, sponsored by Game On Wisconsin, and they are totally paying us to do this together. I'm your host. I'm Jacob Westendorf. It's Wednesday, March 10th, the night before the day our lives all changed a year ago. Honestly, oddly enough, I'm with Jake Morley to celebrate that. You can find him on Twitter. He's at Jacob Morley. Jake, where were you a year ago tomorrow when you found out that Rudy Gobert had tested positive for the coronavirus, and that was essentially shutting the world down?
Well, I was in school, man, and it's funny because we were just talking about this today, me and some guys I teach with, that we were filling out some requisition forms for supplies for next year, and we never got those forms submitted because it was like a Friday or something. We left for the weekend, and over the weekend, they basically just told us, hey, you're online teachers now. And here we are a year later, and it's crazy. Like, hats off to science, man, that we're here. And I mean, this thing, it looks like, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I know last year, knock on wood, I know last year, the last thing we really did was the combine. Like, the NFL combine was probably like the last mass gathering I've been to. The 2020 combine, that's with my buddy Kent Swanson, who's been on the show, and Ugla. And so, man, I'm so excited. I know some of the guys were talking about the House of Athletes, that they did, the combine numbers and stuff that may or may not be real, Jacob. We don't really know what's going on with some of these numbers. Everybody's a 4.3 athlete this year.
I run a 4.3 at these pro days.
Yeah, I jumped 40 just yesterday. I put it on Twitter. It's real. But those guys talking about, it was just nice. And I'm sure the scouts feel the same way. Like, it's just nice to be around other football guys just doing football stuff. So, it's been a long year for a lot of us, and I'm thankful for that, the fact that we had a football season, the fact that we're able to do stuff like this, the fact that a year ago, Jacob, we probably would have had no idea what StreamYard was or what Zoom was. And I'm looking forward to getting to a place where Zoom is a distant memory, something that we say, hey, remember when we used to have meetings via Zoom all the time? So I'm looking forward to that. But speaking of things changing, thinking of new years, Jacob, we got the new NFL year coming up this week.
Yeah, a week from today.
Woo. A week from today. Is it a week from today is when it technically starts? The legal tampering period starts on. So really,
started 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, it started in Mobile. We were in the DMs today talking about there's some guys I think are already going places that it's been in place for a long time. But yeah, it's really going to start on Monday when your thumb is going to get worn out from just refreshing on Twitter. And I'm a little bit disappointed, Jacob, that nothing really happened today in Green Bay. I thought, once the salary cap was going to come in place, and I just thought it was going to be boom, salary cap number, cut, move, restructure, boom, 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 all done. And that didn't really happen in typical Green Bay fashion. They're probably going to wait right up until their backs are against the wall to start just making all those moves. But I think it's interesting. And I know that Zadarius came out and said, I want to be a Packer forever. very odd timing on that, Jacob. What are your thoughts on Zadarius Smith saying that? Was he just saying that because he felt good or what?
I don't think he ever says things just to say them. First of all, one of the, logical ways, if you will, to create cap space is messing with Z's contract. But yeah, it is funny how you mentioned cut, restructure, not happening. And the biggest news that comes out of Packerland today is a tweet. If that's not 2021, then I don't really know what is. But speaking of people we have coming with us, we have the aficionado, as far as I'm concerned, of offensive line play for the Green Bay Packers and around the NFL, former graduate assistant coach of the UW Whitewater Warhawks, the 27-time national champions or something ridiculous like that. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. But the great Owen Riese has joined us. You can follow him on Twitter at ReeseDraft, and a firm believer of hashtag establish the run. Oh, and it's been a minute. How you been?
Good, man. Good. You're looking good. You're looking a lot trimmer than last time I saw you, so that's a good deal. I mean that sincerely. Like, as someone that is too heavy and has struggled to put it off or take it off, I'm glad that you're doing good. But no, yeah, everything's doing well. Had our pro day yesterday with the 7-time national champion Whitewater Warhawks. But no, everything went really well. We had 29, 32 teams had signed up, but 29 actually made their appearance. All but the Seahawks, the Rams, and the Cardinals.
Nobody cares about the NFC West anyways.
A couple teams, the 49ers had 2 guys there. The Packers had 2 guys there. The Steelers had 3. The Patriots had 2. Bengals had 2. So a lot of NFL teams with multiple people there to kind of see Quinn put on the show, and he kind of did. So that was cool.
Yeah, so let's start there. We'll talk about the Packers offensive line and all this other stuff that we've got going on as far as prospects and everything. But, the cool part for you and really everything around is that somebody you coached is a NFL draft prospect this year, and a potential, with the way everything's going, looks like a potential day 2 kind of pick, which, considering Whitewater's a powerhouse, but it's still a small school powerhouse. And it doesn't happen that often that somebody from a school small like that gets picked as high as they will. So tell us a little bit, what do you know about Quinn? What's going to make him successful at the next level? What are some of his best attributes?
Yeah. So, I guess, the first thing is probably get out of the way, but like Quinn's like one of the best, easiest kids to coach, and kind of reading his story, and you hear about him eating nothing but chicken and rice and vegetables 3 meals a day for like basically the last year-ish. Like that level of dedication, that level of work ethic and discipline, make it really easy for us to coach him. And he wants to get better. He's hungry to learn, wants new stuff. So all of those things together, like I said, he's a joy to coach. Obviously he makes me look a lot better than I am. He's awesome. So he was under recruited, coming out of high school, almost went to lacrosse, was a very late add to Whitewater. And his freshman year, didn't play it at all, really. Was kind of on that teetering between scout team and getting up in the 2 deep. But then as a sophomore, kind of just took over next to Nate Truan, who also worked out yesterday. Spent a couple weeks on the active roster with the Buccaneers in 2019. And then was a COVID training camp number reduction cut last year of the Rams. And so as a sophomore, he started next to Nate for 14 games, which obviously was a nice benefit for him. And then last year, 2019, the last year that Division III played, he kind of took over, started all 15 games for us at left guard, and was the most physically dominant player on the field every snap that he was on the field. So I think that's the big thing. And we saw that in Mobile, just like the overt physicality and the run blocking and the strength is just that'll be immediately translatable. I think he's going to, this is me being pretty candid. I think he'll probably get drafted a little too high, as probably awful as that is for a coach to say, right? I want him to go number 1 overall for him, but there's going to be a bit of a transition, and he's still really only had 2.5 days at the Senior Bowl, so there will still be some growing pains, but he's got a nice floor athletically, and then just I don't have any issues with him. Like, he's going to make his money, and I'm not worried about how he's going to spend it. You know, I can't imagine his life is going to change a ton, which should endear him to the NFL teams and kind of endear him to his learning curve in the NFL.
So let's go there. Here's something that, you know, you were kind of talking about is he hasn't played football in a whole season. So what was that like? Just, well, one, for you as a coach to have no season and kind of not knowing and being in flux that entire time, really as soon as a year ago now. And what do you think because something I've been interested in is not even just the guys like the Quinn Miners, but, you know, some of the bigger school kids that either opted out or weren't able to play. You know, Trey Lance hasn't played it down, for example. But what effect do you think that has, if any, on the players that missed a year of playing football?
I mean, like, the big thing, I always say, like, blocking and tackling are the two most fundamental parts of football, and there are repetition-based movements. And there are things that even as you continue to play, you need to continue to get reps at, right? Like, it's not like riding a bike. Like, well, I rode a bike 10 years ago, I can figure it out pretty quick. Like, if you haven't blocked anyone in 10 days, it can be difficult to immediately replicate that. So I think that's something that so at Whitewater, we were fortunate enough. We got 15 padded practices in October. And we're very blessed. I say we, I'm not there anymore, but very blessed with the alumni network and the resources that they have at Whitewater. And so they were able to acquire funding for testing. So they were able to practice in the fall. And Quinn played center probably 8 or 9 practices. And the first day looked pretty rough. He got beat pretty bad by some younger defensive linemen and stuff. And I think he was taken aback by that and really kind of humbled by it, that, you know, how much you need to appreciate and respect the game for what it is and how much of a craft it is. And it's not just being physically better. So from that point, I mean, he kind of took over that way. But he's, I mean, for these guys that have had it for, you know, had a complete year off, it's a big deal. You know, and they're so overtly physically talented. Guys like Levi Onwuzurike, who even when the Pac-12 did jump back in, he remained out. You know, some of the Oregon guys that did that. It's tough, man. Like, they've got an uphill battle for sure. So I don't think anyone like begrudges them for their decision, right? This is a very unprecedented time. I really hope I never have to use that word again, ever again. And but like, so I mean, it's a delicate situation, but I mean, I certainly, you know, some of these guys really put themselves behind the 8 ball, some of them more voluntarily than others, some with justifiable reasons, you know, but the fact of the matter is, you know, if you're a better football player, if you've more recently played football than someone else, more than likely.
And so, Owen, at the Senior Bowl, I think what Quinn really did that was super impressive was everyone knowing all of that he, you know, he's a Division III guy coming up playing with SEC kids, and the fact that you wouldn't have been able to tell. You know, there was no intimidation. He came out there. I mean, he was comfortable. He had the muscle gut out, which was like the talk of the week. But he backed it up with his play. If he just would have been some dude out there with his gut hanging out, no one would have cared, right? But he was out there moving bodies, looking good, looking like an SEC type athlete. And the fact that, you know, maybe he hadn't played against talent like that. Maybe he hadn't played in a while. Because you look at guys like, I remember watching like a good example is Dylan Raditz, the kid from North Dakota State. His first 2 reps in Indo were bad. Like you looked at him and it really looked like, man, here's a kid that has not played more than, you know, 3 quarters this season. And he got whooped. He got dusted his first couple plays. And with Quinn, that's what was really impressive to me with him was the fact that he didn't even have that transitional period where it was like, man, ooh, here we go. He just came in day one and was like, hey, I'm here. I deserve to be here, and I'm going to play my butt off. And what I want to ask you is, what's that like for you? Like, I can't imagine how nervous, like you might have been more nervous than he was, you know, on those first couple 20 minutes of practice. How did you kind of handle all of that? Because I know obviously he's your guy. You want him to go out there and represent your school and represent, you know, someone that you would coach, but kind of walk us through what was going through your mind those first, you know, few reps of practice.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I was scheduled to go to Mobile, but I tested positive for COVID about 4 days before I would have went down. And I would just like to say that for the sake of everyone else, it's probably for the best, because I would have been a liability down there. But no, I couldn't have been happier for him. So as I mentioned, he did play with us in the fall, and he played center for us in the fall for the sake of his own personal development. Like, we would have been more than happy to let him play at guard, but he wanted to play center. And so when he texted me and said, yeah, they're going to have me at center the first 2 days, I would be lying if I told you that I wasn't a bit apprehensive. He was not, he was fine at center, don't get me wrong, but he was not the same player that he was at guard for Whitewater. There's more going on. There's a lot more to process. You need to get the snap there right. There's different angles. There's different assignments. And it was all foreign to him. Even, however many times he wanted to snap it at a garbage can in his backyard, it's just a different thing. So when he told me that, part of me was like, man, like, this might not be great. Like, he's not going down there against D3 guys. Like, you've got Onwuzurike and Odigizua from UCLA and Patrick Jones and like a couple of the Notre Dame guys. I'm like, there's some dudes down there, and I couldn't have been more thrilled that I was wrong. That from the outset, it was immediate. Like I said, and his thing is always going to be just like overt physicality and intensity. But I couldn't have been more proud of him, of the effort and the performance he gave for the year-long culmination of reshaping his body. Because when we played in the national championship game in 2019, he was probably like 335. And the next time I saw him, he was 308 pounds, about 3 weeks to a month later, when we started winter lifting before we got shut down. And so, I mean, like, how he's reshaped his body, staying between 320 and 325, not having a cheat meal for months at a time. All of that sacrifice that he put into that. I guess I couldn't have been happier. I couldn't have been a more deserving kid. And then again, to not only just get the opportunity, but then to go down there and capitalize on it and really make his mark. As you mentioned, not only just that's the guy who has his gut out, but also is objectively one of the best offensive linemen down here. And whether, if that's anybody, that's phenomenal, and you're happy for the kid and the opportunity and him taking advantage of it. Then when you get to the partial part of it, where it's that's my kid, like, that's my guy, which I also have kind of tried to relax with a little bit, because it's him, right? It's not, I can take credit, and I was an assistant coach with him. I haven't done anything, right? Like, this kid has been, it's all him. So I was over the moon. I was screaming in my living room, watching on TV. Had I been down in Mobile, I would have been a problem. So no, that was to get off my soapbox. I couldn't be happier for him down there, and then just how this entire process has worked for him.
Kind of bummed that didn't happen now, because I kind of wish that you might have ended up on, my general rule of thumb when I'm in a public venue is don't end up on Deadspin, which Deadspin's like dead now. So I don't know what the internet platform is that takes, like, this guy acted like a jackass and put it on the internet thing, but whatever that site is, I would have been interested to spin it up on, Twitter. Yeah, I suppose that would be it. So let's move. We could do the Quinn Miners thing all night long. Is obvious. It's pretty clear that not only do you know him really well, but there's quite a bit of pride, and that beams through, and that's awesome to see, first and foremost. But let's move to the Packers side of these things. And somebody you mentioned of the difficulty of moving to left guard and playing center, and just that overall, just the difference in that. And I think about it, on my end of things, I did that when I was in high school, but I also played at a tiny high school where we had a very basic, simple term of offense. And it was a difference between something as simple as which foot do you step with first, or, which hand, what angle, like, just all that stuff you were talking about. That's interesting. But Elton Jenkins, all pro player at left guard. Well, I don't remember if he was actually all pro or if he was snubbed, either way, but a really good player at left guard, played center this year and played right tackle. And now going into this uncertain offseason where Bakhtiari's back, Lindsley's probably not. Where do you see his best position at moving forward? And do you think, because the big thing now is, can he play tackle, because he did it for 8 quarters or whatever it was throughout the early part of the season?
So we've had this discussion before. I'm not always a big proponent of moving people for the sake of like, oh, well, this position's more important, right? Like I'm much more well, this guy's a really good guard, so we're going to let him play guard and be really good there, because I'd rather have one position be worse than 2, right? Or to keep, I don't think it can be overstated how impressive it is for anybody, much less Elton Jenkins, to play at the level that he did, moving from left guard to playing center to playing right tackle to really just kind of being whatever they needed him to be and not having a drop off. That's very difficult. And I think, so to me, as long as they have a plan, I don't really care where, right? Like I would prefer to keep him at left guard or center. Just because he can play right tackle. Like I remember having this conversation with Mike Renner, one of my boys, where he was like, yeah, well, if Quentin Nelson's that good, play him at left tackle. And I'm like, well, no, like he's maybe the best left guard in football. Like, why would you make him a less good, a less effective left tackle, and then also get significantly worse at left guard, rather than leaving the guy who's really good at left guard, and we'll figure out the other spot. Like I said, to me, I don't really care if he plays guard or center or whatever. If they could play him at tackle, if Elton's cool with it and they have a plan, then I don't really care. But as long as they have a plan so he can prepare, because I think the taken for granted part of the week-to-week Twitter speculation, this guy's dinged, he might not play. Well, here's 6 different hypothetical lineups they could put out there that I'm going to treat that will all play the same. Like this is Madden, and like everyone knows everything. Like there's a lot to that. So, ideally, I would probably keep him at left guard or move him to center. I think that the John Runyon, we've seen him. He's been good. Lane Taylor has also played guard, is still with us for the time being. Whether they someone like, and I don't mean to jump forward here, but someone like Elijah Vera Tucker is someone that would be very enticing to me. And he's got the former tackle background the Packers seem to prefer. But as long as you've got an option, I don't really care what the combination is, as long as you give the players the opportunity to be in a position to succeed. So if he's at center and you're going to play John Runyon at guard, awesome. If you leave him at left guard and you're going to draft a center, awesome. I don't really, this might not be great TV, but I don't really have a strong opinion, as long as you give the player a chance to do it, because he's shown he can be really good at multiple spots. But I don't want to take that as an O-line coach. I don't want to take that for granted and just be like, yeah, well, wherever we need to put Elton this week, he'll be great, because eventually, like that's just kind of a dangerous game. I'd rather, continuity on the offensive line is a very important thing. So wherever you're going to put them, leave them there, and hopefully prepare yourself and give yourself a chance to be ready at multiple spots, right? Like hopefully it doesn't take one injury to have to reshuffle 3 different guys.
Yeah. And I'm 100% with you there. Like if you have an all-pro left guard versus a league average right tackle, you keep the all-pro and you try to find the league average guy somewhere else. But speaking of prospects, and before we jump to the draft, the Packers still have, 3 relatively unknown prospects on this team. You talked about John Runyon Jr., and we all saw him and were impressed with him, that college offensive tackle kicking inside and really playing well on short notice as well. And you already touched on this. Props to John Runyon Jr. for being ready to play. He probably played, I think, probably 2 or 3 times this year. And 2 of those times he had dead ass no business playing. Just crazy stuff happened and he's in the lineup and he held up really well. So I think there's a lot to be excited about, and I'd love to hear your take on him. But then the 2 other guys that we really don't know much about are the Jake Hansons and the Simon Stepaniaks of the world. If you can, dive deep back into your draft analyst hat from last year and talk a little bit about those two guys and what you think they can offer to this Packers team moving forward.
Yeah, so Jake Hansen is a zone center. He was a guy I enjoyed watching him against Auburn, right? Because those are like the biggest potential contrast of style, right? Being that I don't want to say finesse because Oregon played pretty physically, but like movement-oriented center, right? And then like watching him go against the 335-pound freak and Derek Brown, right? Like I remember a lot of people, well, he's not getting any movement. I'm like, well, he's not going to. Like I hate to burst on that. He's not. I think it was, I don't want to say it was like disheartening that they didn't really get active or like play much at all, because I don't know if they necessarily should have been asked to, like we mentioned with Runyon, like don't force them into positions to fail. But I would feel better if they weren't asked. The one pick out of those that like truly surprised me because, right, like Hansen is a center only, but like, it's a pretty good mover, right? That was like if there's one thing you could say about Jake Hansen, he was a good athlete for the position and he could move, and that was how he was going to win. Stepaniak was like the kind of like the black sheep, like the heavy-footed guard that was like really physical, that wasn't kind of didn't quite fit the mold. And we didn't see any of him, and obviously and unfortunately didn't have any preseason games, which I will stand for the end of time that keep 4 preseason games, because I don't care what the 7 guys on your roster that are automatically going to make it and aren't going to play want. Like, stop this crap with like, let's get a 17th regular season game. Like, let the guys play. You're
too
giving
late for that one, but
giving kids a chance to like give these kids an opportunity to play and get evaluated, because they might not be playing for the Packers, but you might have a chance to play for the Seahawks later, and those are the only reps that you have, right? Like, so I think those guys were pretty behind the 8 ball. They didn't have much. Obviously, they didn't play, but then also they just didn't have the preparation opportunities that they normally would. So I would feel better with Jake Hansen having to play, I guess, in a pinch. But as we, like I said, we didn't really see much from him. I was surprised that Hansen got drafted. I will say that. But in the 6th round, really, who cares? You're just kind of solidifying undrafted free agents that you want to make sure you get. So, I mean, outside of that, like to me, like Runyon by far was the star of that. Hansen and Stepaniak, you see the allure, right? Like Hansen again with the movement, and Stepaniak with the like strong punch, and was really good looking for work in pass pro, just very physical and whatever. But was kind of, like I said, kind of a square peg in a round hole in that offense. Probably one of those guys that some area scouts stood on the table for. Just he was a great kid and a really hard worker. But that's kind of I would prefer not have to depend on them, truthfully.
Yeah, and I know the thing is like, well, Jake Hansen didn't even make the team. He must suck. It's like, you like, we don't really know. Some of those guys, especially at that position, man, like you can look like, dog trash all week. And then some of those guys are just gamers. And we've seen it time and time again, to kind of go to your point about the preseason. Some of these guys, like, I mean, there are guys that we would have never heard of that went on to have really successful NFL careers because of the preseason, so I'm with you there. But moving forward to the draft, before we even get in the draft, Owen, I want to ask you, just because when I watch film, if there's one position that I don't feel as comfortable watching, it's offensive line. And it's just because for me, and Jacob and I were talking about this in the pre-production meeting, I can tell you if a guy's really good. I can tell you if a guy's really bad. But those guys in the middle, when people start talking about, this and that, or I see this, you start talking about even Jake Hansen's movement ability or Stepaniak's punch and stuff like that. Like, I see that stuff, but like, I don't know where to stack these guys. And it's tough for me. And I know you're someone that I think a lot of people will point to, even on Twitter, as like, what does Owen think about this guy? And I'm one of them. Like, if there's an offensive lineman and you have an opinion on him, I'm listening. So from your eyes, what do you look for when you're just turning on the film, watching an offensive lineman? What are some things that stand out to you that really solidify him as a good player?
So I'm a big believer in like players are like types. Each player is their own player. They have their own personality. They have their own style. And then you can kind of like, so for Quinn, right? Like for the low hanging fruit, he's an above average athlete, but like he is a mauler, right? Like that's his like, so you're going, so once you get a grasp of say, what's he trying to accomplish, right? Because you can block, if you're the left guard on inside zone to the right, you can block that guy a lot of different ways, but depending on who you are as a player will probably give me a better chance of like, well, this is how he's probably going to try to do this. So like one of the first things I try to do, I try to just get like a general idea of the player, truthfully, like how does he want to win? How is like within the structure of the offense, what are they looking to do? And how does he prefer to win? And then, there's certain guys, like I watched Trey Smith a couple weeks ago, and he's a big, strong dude, right? Like he wants to push people around. He's going to put himself in positions where he'll have poor leverage or he will be over aggressive. And some people will kill him on Twitter for that, which is fine. And I get that. But like, once you understand like, well, that is him, then you're a bit more forgiving of it. Or I tend to be, because you're like, well, like that's how he's going to try to do it. That's his goal. That's how he wins. Right. So why would you back off of what you do well when you're going up against superior competition? You're playing Alabama. I'm going to do what I do best, because why would I limit myself to do that? Right. So there's certain things where like I try to get a good grasp on a guy, right? How does he want to play? How does he want to win? And then a lot of it is truthfully looking at like their ability to bend. Do they bend at their knees, or do they bend at their waists? Right. Are they able to drop their butt? That is a big thing for me, as far as probably kind of one of those like super niche things. But like that was a thing I took a lot of pride in at the Senior Bowl. Like I can generally tell you, watching a guy pass twice, if he's good or not. And sometimes I wasn't right, but there was a lot of guys where I was like, that guy ain't it, or he doesn't have it. And you can just kind of tell how rigid, how stiff they are. And there are really good guys that are rigid and stiff, right? Don't get me wrong, but just kind of being able to like get an idea of the player, and then what can you expect from them, or what should I, kind of look for from them, right? So then that's probably a really broad way of saying it. But like I try to figure out who the player is, how they want to do it, and then try to evaluate it from there. And then at that point, then you're like, kind of like you said, the physical traits, right? Like this guy is very strong, or he's, really mobile, really laterally quick. Because a lot of that stuff, like I would rather figure out how they're going to do it and then how they use their parts, rather than like, I'm not going to kill a kid. I'm not going to kill Jake Hansen because he can't get movement on Derek Brown, right? Like if Jake Hansen was 340 pounds and then he can't get movement on Derek Brown, like, well, then okay. Like then maybe that's a little different, right? Because if you're 340, you're probably not a movement-oriented center. So kind of stuff like that, just try to get a snapshot of them, and then that way really being able to kind of microscope in and see what's going on. But there are a lot of things, granted, that like as an offensive line coach, little gamesmanship things you'll see, little ways they kind of, I don't want to say cheat, because O linemen don't cheat. That's what defensive linemen do. But like little ways that you can give yourself an advantage against a defensive lineman that isn't going to get called. And it's truthfully one of those things, like it's not quite within the rules, but like it's kind of a gray area. Like little back pads or stuff that you kind of gain an appreciation for. Like you can kind of get an idea of how savvy they are as a player. Because there are some guys you'll watch, some really good guys, like they only win one way. And they're really good at it. But then like when there's guys that if they're not superior physical talents, like they better be able to figure it out and have multiple different ways to kind of on the fly. So that's probably not a super insightful way, but that's kind of the way I do it. If I'm looking at a guy, and if it's someone like Deontay Brown, I probably have a idea at the outset when I see a guard who's 365 pounds, but like try to get an idea, get how they win, how they want to do it. And then kind of from there, kind of really focusing in on like, well, this guy wants to win this way, but he's still not doing this really well. So like, is that a limiting factor? Is that is that something to to really monitor moving forward? And then at that point, is it a coaching thing? Is it a player thing? Is it a physical capability thing? And that's kind of where I try to like really kind of zoom in at that point. But it's get an idea of the player. How do they want to win? Right. Cause they're on scholarship. There are no bad, like that's the other thing too. I get really, I'll say it in jest and I know I shouldn't. And like Twitter is notorious for like, yeah, well, this guy sucks. I'm like, this guy's like one of the best 100 guys in the world at his job. So like, no, he doesn't suck. Right. So like any of these Division I athletes, they're all good. Right. Like, but you're human. So there's certain things where as a player, just maybe not capable of doing it, or maybe you're not being coached to do it, or because of the style of your offense, you're not lending yourself to that, or things like that. So I try to get as much context. I know Brandon Thorne, who is a much smarter offensive line advocate than I am, will always champion and fight for the context, right? Like you need to gain as much knowledge as you can, because O-line is probably the most misunderstood position in sports, and it's the least like desirable to play. Chuck McDonald on Twitter, I remember told me once, he's like, no one plays offensive line on purpose. So like there's a certain point to that. And then there's a lot, I guess I'll get off my soapbox. There's a lot to it. So like being able to figure out what the player is capable of, and then how they're trying to do it. Are they accomplishing what they want to, how they want to, and if not, why, and then kind of figure it out from there.
Dude, that was awesome. That was really good. That was the scouting notebook with Owen Riese. That's really good stuff. That needs to be on like a coach's clinic. So I appreciate that answer, because that's also going to help me as I move forward and watch some of this stuff. Because you said it wasn't very insightful, but I thought that was fantastic.
He's grading himself on a curve, like maybe not very insightful for what he thinks, but for a moron like you or me. Yeah, some of that stuff was brand spanking new for me. So you mean to tell me that playing offensive line isn't as simple as this guy's across from me, I block him?
It's also really hard.
It's also really hard.
Even when it is that simple, that's your one job. Do that one thing. Move this 350-pound man.
It's as close to, Jimmy Christensen is a MMA fighter, and it's one of those positions where that's the sport where like, if you lose, we know it was you. Like there is no hiding on anything like that. So it's like playing offensive tackle is like, if you get beat for a sack, that might be the one time you screw up the entire game, but that's going to be the one thing we remember, not the 55 other dropbacks where you were a stonewall kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's a good way. Like you said, nobody plays offensive line on purpose. I ended up there, but I didn't want to be an offensive lineman when I started playing football.
Offensive lineman screws up one time, and it's a great game for the defensive lineman because he had a sack.
Yep.
No one talks about the 80 plays he didn't touch anybody, but the one sack he got, get one of the week, you'll get paid a lot of money.
Yep. Paid a lot of money. That's right. So let's get a little more specific. We're running a little bit low on our time frame here, but looking into the interior offensive line in this class that you have in here, where I want to start is something that I appreciate about having conversation with you is, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is when it comes to the draft, one of my peeves is the groupthink that comes with everything. And the idea of, you can't draft Quentin Nelson in the top 10 because Quentin Nelson plays guard. Do you think the Indianapolis Colts regret the fact that they drafted Quentin Nelson? I would say probably not at this stage of his career. But looking into this class, can you take a guard philosophically, I guess, can you take a guard or a center in the first round? And moving forward from there, who are some of your favorite guys from this class that you think fit in Green Bay?
Well, I mean, I would, for the record. But yeah, I think I don't think anyone's going to go that high. I know we've kind of talked about this. The Packers generally take offensive linemen, or they prefer offensive linemen that have offensive tackle backgrounds. I think that's been something that, for a long time, they've been a primarily zone-based blocking scheme. So a lot of horizontal stretch, right? So athleticism is a premium. So I think that makes a lot of sense. There's some guys, Trey Smith, I mentioned earlier. I don't think he'll be a fit for them, but he has played tackle. Elijah Vera Tucker, I also mentioned earlier. I think he could very well be a target at 29. Played tackle at USC, a very good athlete position, very good mover. There are guys I would love if they took Landon Dickerson at 29. I don't know. One, I don't know if he'll be there. But two, he's also got he's very banged up. Tore his ACL right at the end of the year, which is actually part of the reason why Quinn was able to get to the Senior Bowl. So shout out Landon Dickerson's knees. But he was probably, for my money, the best offensive lineman in the country. Regardless of position. Now, obviously, Penei Sewell didn't play, and that's neither here nor there. But Landon Dickerson was the best player in a runaway race, the best offensive line in the country. He was physically dominant. He's never doing anything wrong. He's never in the wrong spot at center, and especially in Alabama, there is a lot of communication up front. He's taking care of that. Every week for Cole Kublik to tweet out a video of him finding work in pass pro and just absolutely smashing somebody that's not expecting it. I think Quinn Miners fits what Green Bay wants to do. I think he's athletic enough to do it. At Whitewater, we are primarily an inside zone team. So the Packers run a lot more wide zone than we did at Whitewater, but I don't think that's out of Quinn's wheelhouse. Obviously he's a big, strong dude, right? But I think he's fully capable of doing that. I just saw someone in the comments that said Deontay Brown. I would not anticipate Deontay Brown being a Packer target. Just because I mentioned earlier, he is 360 pounds. And while he does move well for a guy who is 360 pounds, he's just not quite Green Bay's archetype at the position. I could see someone like Kendrick Green from Illinois. He played guard at Illinois. He's a guy that's been shooting up a lot of boards. He's been working with Duke Anyweather. Now, not a lot of people making many excuses to watch Illinois football, granted, but it's been very good. I was impressed with him. And then Tristan Ho, I'm not sure how Hogue or Hoge. From BYU is another guy who I was very impressed with. Anyone who's watched any Zach Wilson saw that much issue with any defense, and a lot had to do with not having any issue or with any defensive lineman in his face or really remotely near him at all. So I think he's another guy I think could be someone the Packers look at. Truthfully, there are a lot of guys in this class that are very guard only, like someone like Wyatt Davis from Ohio State. It's a very propped up name and he's very good. But I wouldn't expect the Packers to take someone like that with a high pick. Given that, like I said, they just don't take non-tackles high. They kind of broke their rules last year, but that was 2 6th-round picks. One more maybe, and I guess in that, and I'll end on this. Drake Jackson from Kentucky is a guy who Kentucky is a very, very zone-heavy scheme. They haven't had a ton from the quarterback position throwing the football. In 2019, they had Lynn there after a couple of injuries, and they basically turned into a single-wing high school offense, which was pretty sick, admittedly. And then this past year, they had a very mobile quarterback who a bit erratic football, and he was very, very impressive on that. Again, it's playing in the SEC, and you're basically playing with an arm back to have any type of success running the ball. Very impressive. So Drake Jackson would be a guy that he's a little small. He's probably closer to 6'1" and 290-ish, 295 if he eats a couple burgers. So I think he's a guy that's probably in that 4th to 5th round if the Packers are looking for a interior specific guy. Is a guy that would be good. He's very technical, and I know was very well respected by their O-line coach. His name escapes me at the moment. I feel bad, but passed away during the year. But Drake Jackson really led that, and there's a lot of respect there. So I'm sure that's going to endear him to. So I think that's something to kind of push that. That'll be a big calling card for him. But he's one of the few guys. There are a lot of big, heavy-footed, massive offensive linemen this year, which is not typically what the Packers are looking for.
So just to recap then real quick, the Packers are typically looking for guys with athleticism. Obviously that zone running scheme matters on that. And I think the most important thing you can take away from what Owen said to us is offensive linemen don't cheat. Defensive linemen do. They're the worst people on the planet. I think that's the biggest thing that we can get to out of this whole thing. So we're out of time for this edition of the show. I want to thank you guys for following along with us in the chats and the comments. He's Owen Riese. You can find him on Twitter at Riese Draft. Let's see, jokes about just about anything, old wrestling highlight tapes, and anything dealing with establishing the run game. And did I miss anything?
No, I mean, I think you hit it. I try to, for longer and longer. I think it's something like, not to take myself seriously, but I try to take my work seriously. And that's something that I think we do a pretty good job. I joke around a lot. I'll tweet about, like you said, old wrestling. I'll tweet about stock car racing. I make fun of Warren Sharp a lot, but like other than that, it's a lot of football stuff and, trying to preserve the sanctity of the game of football as it continues to be made softer by fantasy football and Roger Goodell. But yeah, no, it's a good time. Like I said, try not to take myself too seriously on Twitter. A lot of people tend to do that, and it's kind of annoying. But I don't know. I think I'm pretty fun. And
big on the analytics side of things, right?
Just run the ball, man. Hand it off. Hand it off.
Perfect.
Yeah, we ran a bubble for 4 yards, or you could just hand it off.
Well, there you have it, guys. There's everything that you need right there. If you really want to get into Owen's mentions, the college dominator rating is my personal favorite thing that comes out every single year. I believe last year, your response to like 4 consecutive tweets that mentioned that was, what the bleep does that even mean?
What do you think Quinn's college dominator rating is?
My other question is, do you think 10, he cares?
No,
I don't think he knows, and I don't think he cares. I think that's what it really boils down to. What's one of your go-to lines? My personal favorite is and correct me if I say this wrong, but just because you can quantify something does not mean you should.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that it means anything.
Right. I think that's the perfect way to do that. So, and football is very simple. Well, it's a simple game at its core. You mentioned it at the very top. It's blocking and tackling. That's why we talk blocking tonight. You can find Jake Morley. He's at Jacob Morley. Jake, tell us about that Kansas City Chiefs Arrowhead Pride draft guide.
Yeah. So I didn't do a great job of selling it. Me talking to Owen about not knowing anything about offensive linemen, but luckily I don't do the grading on those guys. But if you want to support us, I know the Cheesehead TV one just came out. You can head over to my Twitter account. You can go to Gumroad at KC Draft Guide or something like that. But the link is in there. Just another resource for draft nerds to have at their disposal. Something, how I always was when before I wrote about the draft, and I'm still this way, is I want to read as much stuff as I can from people that I think know what they're talking about. So go over there and get you one of those, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. So check that out. And you guys have actually been awesome. I've had a lot of Packers fans in my DMs from last year talking about enjoying it, and those same guys in my DMs this year talking about getting one this year. So appreciate all you guys for the support that you always give.
And in terms of people who know what they're talking about, that certainly is not me, but I would like to think I entertain you a little bit along the way. So if you want to give me a follow, I'm at Jacob Westendorf on Twitter. Doing a little bit this year I'm doing the tight ends for the Cheesehead TV draft guide on some stuff over here as well. Owen will also be in the Cheesehead. Are you doing fullbacks too?
Fullbacks, H-backs, and interior offensive line.
There you go. So some man positions there from him, and I get a little. It's like the first step towards being a pass catcher is the tight end spot, because you can kind of be an offensive lineman in that role too. So thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll be back next week. Next week, we're talking offensive tackles, and we will have the guy who's doing our offensive tackles over at Game On. His name's Andrew Mertens, and that could be a position of need for the Packers as soon as pick number 29. So be sure to tune in for that, and we'll see you guys next week. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.